We got to talk some NBA. We got to talk some Sixers, some Joel Embiid, and more. Right now with the co-host of the NBA Pod. He's also the quality editor for Bleacher Report and contributor for Forbes Sports. He is Bryan Toporek, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, welcome to official NBA Restart Day.
Thank you. That is music to my ears, man.
I was saying off the air to you, and those who haven't listened to the NBA Pod, you absolutely should, because you and Mort cover a lot of ground, but I don't know how many more lists Mort could have dealt with at this point. So.
Yeah, he's ready for a break for sure.
I don't know how many more drafts you guys could have redrafted too. Even though those pods were a lot of fun to listen to, you guys argue about some of those guys. But listen, the NBA is back tonight, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to it. So, Bryan, I'm just going to give you an open palette here. What's the one thing you're looking forward to most about the return of the NBA?
Yeah, I mean, everything would be the easy answer, but, from a Sixers perspective, I think they're really one of the most interesting teams to watch heading into the restart. They had such an up and down season. They were supposed to be one of the title favorites coming into the year, and then pretty significantly underachieved. Now coming into this restart, we have the lineup switch. Al Horford's going to the bench. Shake Milton moves into the starting lineup. Ben Simmons comes off the ball more, is going to play at the 4. So just seeing how all of that works. I mean, conceptually, before the season even went on hiatus in March, we started to see hints of this with Horford came off the bench in that game against the Clippers right before the All-Star break, and that worked really well. And a lot of people covering the team were starting to kind of point out, hey, maybe this is something we should move toward full time. So, to some extent, this long layoff actually gave Brett Brown and the Sixers coaching staff a chance to really evaluate, will this thing work? Is this the best way to maximize our roster? So, these 8 seeding games is going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. We got to see it in these 3 scrimmages, and I mean, the early returns are positive, but, it's hard to read too much into a scrimmage. So I think we'll start to get our real taste of this starting Saturday.
Are you buying into the Ben Simmons jump shot? 2 games in a row now, no jumper. And even though it's an exhibition game, seeing him do it the first game, it's exciting. But if he's not going to do it in the exhibition games after that, why would he start doing it in postseason play?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not buying it as he's going to take 5 threes a game. Anyone putting their expectations that high is bound to be disappointed. I mean, based on the comments that Brett has been continually making since they've arrived in Orlando, it does seem like there's kind of a mental shift with Ben now that he's playing off the ball more. He realizes, I have to stand out there and space the floor, and I have to be willing to take those shots for opponents to respect me. I mean, otherwise they're just going to stag off of him and double team Joe. So I do think the fact he had a quick trigger against Memphis, both of those 2 threes, he let it fly without hesitation. And no, I don't think he's going to knock down 40% of them. It's going to be a low percentage shot. It's, not necessarily going to be the way for the Sixers to maximize their expected points per possession on every play. But the threat of that is going to help their spacing. Just having, if an opponent knows Ben is willing to take that shot, they can't sag off as much, that's going to open up driving lanes for his teammates. That's going to prevent Joe getting double teamed as often. So even if it's not the best way to maximize him, just because he's not going to be a strong shooter right away, it really might help the team maximize its potential.
Now, I have a bet going right now, over under 4.5 threes in the 8 regular season games for Ben Simmons, and it's just attempts. He doesn't even have to make them, so it's over under 4.5 3 attempts. I went under. Do you think I'm going to lose?
I think you might.
Come on.
I hope you didn't bet too much.
No, just a 6-pack of IPAs.
Okay, yeah, you're fine then. Yeah, I mean, who knows, to be fair, but I do think the fact we saw him take those so quickly and so early, and I mean, here's the beautiful thing about the seeding games for the Sixers. they don't really matter. I mean, there's no home court advantage down in Orlando, so the Sixers' ridiculous home road splits don't come into play here. I mean, they could move up to the 5 and get Miami in the first round most likely, or stay at 6 and get Boston probably. I don't get the impression that they care all that much who they end up drawing. So, I don't think it's going to be in Ben's head that like, oh my gosh, I need to, really make sure I make zero mistakes. Like, I think this is going to be a time for experimentation because of all these big lineup changes for the Sixers and this, this adaptation to this new role. So I think he actually might be more willing to, kind of push his own limits than he has been for most of his time in Philly so far.
So which are you more concerned with then, Brian? Is it Ben Simmons shooting jump shots or Joel Embiid's mindset down there?
I mean, Joe, honestly, it's Joe's health in general. He sat out those 2 scrimmages with the calf soreness. He did participate in practice today, and they're going to update his status tomorrow ahead of Saturday's game. But as of now, it doesn't sound like there's any real reason to expect this is like a big, serious issue. But, I mean, they're going to go as far as Joel Embiid takes them, ultimately. So number one concern is his health. I think mentally, I'm not too concerned about that. So, I would say Ben Simmons jump shots by default, just because that's going to be an issue for frankly, his entire NBA career, probably. But yeah, I mean, I'm not too worried, about like Joe not having the motivation because the home crowd's not going to be there. Maybe the 300 virtual fans, the virtual Philly fans can motivate him. But I mean, I think all of these guys know they're here for a reason. They didn't volunteer to go leave their house for up to 3 months, be quarantined down in Orlando, and they're going to like lollygag when they're down there. I think they come in, and it's not just them, it's every team. They're coming in with a purpose. They're coming in, they know it's time to go. It's not like a January game against the New York Knicks. We have 8 seeding games and the playoffs begin. So you have that time to ramp up and get yourself back into game shape. But mentally, I think they're locked in already. And we saw it in the scrimmages. I mean, their defense with the starters on the floor, the main rotation players on the floor, they were flying around. They looked good. So I think that's an encouraging sign for sure.
I'm just concerned about, Joel Embiid. I was saying, I don't really want to go to the bubble, but I feel almost obligated to go. I owe it to my team. I owe it to the city. The fact that he didn't really seem like he pressed to get out there to play the other scrimmage games. The fact that in some ways he kind of lollygagged through part of the season. I'm just a little concerned about, where his head is at in terms of being a basketball player, because we know that when he's locked in, he's one of the best players in the league. But when he's not locked in, it's like, oh, great, here we go again.
Yeah, no, he definitely, this was an up and down season for him. I think the spacing issues that stemmed from the awkward fit between him, Ben, and Al Horford, it seemed to really wear at him at times. And he clearly was just not having as much fun out there as he usually does. And it, you can, much like you can tell if it's going to be a good or a good or a bad Ben game, just kind of like in those first few possessions, is he attacking the basket? Is he pushing the tempo? With Joe, you can just read his body language. And a lot of times this year it was not great. So, yeah, I mean, that's certainly a concern. But again, I do think that even after the All-Star break, or right when the season was shutting down, he dominated. I mean, they were going through him at the end of the All-Star game. And it seemed like that was kind of that motivation to remind him, like, oh, these are the best basketball players in the world, and they are choosing to go through me. Like, this is how dominant I can be. And down in Orlando, he said similar things. He said, like, I want the offense to go through me. This is my team. Like, I need to dominate. This is how we win. The fact he came to Orlando in what seems to be pretty good shape. I mean, Brett Brown was very complimentary of the work he put in during the layoff, which is good to see. I mean, that was one of the big concerns for me before all the teams arrived, was just like, what shape are these guys going to be in? But so far, so good on that end. So, I mean, fingers crossed he'll stay healthy through these 8 seeding games. It would be a real bummer for, any player to suffer an injury. We saw, Eric Gordon of the Rockets twist his ankle the other night, and he's probably going to be out for 1 to 2 weeks. So I think, the top priority for these seeding games is to make sure everyone stays healthy. They're ready to go for August 17th when the playoffs start. And then, figure out how this new starting lineup works, and also how the rotation works in general. Like, which guys are coming off the bench, which guys are steady rotation players, which guys are more matchup dependent.
Do you think that Brett Brown is coaching for his job this playoff run?
It's hard to say. I think had the season not, had the last 4 months not happened, had this just been a normal season, no 4-month pause, no coronavirus, no weird economic fallout that's going to hit the NBA and most owners, yeah, he probably was. Even going back to last year, there was a lot of speculation about his job security, and I think he acquitted himself well, particularly in the playoffs. In that Raptors series, he was quick to make some adjustments, even in the Brooklyn series too. So now that, we don't know what the financial fallout is going to be from all of this, we don't know what next season is going to look like, but, there's already some reports that the NBA is looking at, regional bubbles or another bubble situation. So that's going to have some major economic fallout. I think a lot of teams might be hesitant to fire their coaches, honestly, just because they're going to be bringing in a lot less money. Regardless of how they play, if it's in their own stadiums or in another bubble, more likely than not, fans aren't going to be there for most, if not all, of next season. So, we're talking like 40% of the league's revenue is out the door before we even get started. So I don't know that, the Sixers owners are going to be very psyched to be paying 2 coaches at the same time. So I think that actually might help him. But at the same time, they have a lot of big decisions coming up. Josh Richardson, the free agent after next season. Can this Al Horford, Tobias Harris, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, all of whom are on these massive contracts, can this team win a championship? If not, they're probably not going to want to pay luxury tax, especially if the cap falls or doesn't go up as much as they want. So I think that's going to be the first change they make rather than blow up the roster itself. It's probably, okay, the coach is a scapegoat. Who can we bring in? And that's the other question is, is there a guy out there who you're convinced can come in and make this team win right away?
Bryan Toporek joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at @BToporek. Also, check out the NBA Pod, the podcast with him and Morton Jensen. Always great content on the podcast. Bryan, I also got to ask you about Tobias Harris. He's looked really good in these scrimmages. He got rid of the headband. He looks extra serious, Tobias. He's got this new leadership role. He's the co-star, the Matisse Thybulle vlogs on YouTube. So I think Tobias, I don't think it's an accident that he's been the team's leading scorer in all these scrimmages. So, what is your impressions of him right now?
Yeah, nothing but positive things to say about Tobias Harris, both on and off the court. It does seem like he's taken more of a leadership mantle in these last few months, which is great to see. He's the team's highest paid player right now, I believe. So with that comes the added responsibility, and he might have not wanted to step on Joe and Ben's toes. Having just come here last year, you come in and you feel like it's their team, they're the all-stars, you just want to fit in. But I think the fact that he's showing a little bit more aggression on the court, which is great to see. After that first scrimmage, Brett was particularly complimentary of his offensive rebounding. Look, he's a big part of this team. If the Sixers are going to win a championship this year, it can't just be Joe and Ben. They need guys like Tobias, Shake Milton, Al Horford, Josh Richardson. They need big contributions for all of them. And, I don't expect Tobias Harris to score 30 points a game or whatever, but, if he can average around 20, shoot in the mid-40s, hit a couple threes per night, that's what they need out of him. So it's great to see him, attack these scrimmages like their regular season games or even like their playoff games. Like the intensity has been there for him. I mean, Matisse in particular has been extremely complimentary. You know, earlier today he spoke with reporters and they asked about Tobias in particular. And Matisse had nothing but good things to say about, you know, how Tobias has kind of gathered the team together and, you know, taken on that role of developing chemistry.
How many minutes can you anticipate Al Horford getting? Because Brett Brown said that there was not a lot of time of Embiid and Horford during practices. And then he also mentioned a while back that they're shooting for about 38 minutes of Joel Embiid. So that leaves, 10 to 13 minutes for Al Horford? And I just feel like that's way too small for the amount of money he's getting paid.
Yeah, I think the 38 minutes is ambitious for Embiid, especially, you know, with this calf injury now. We'll see what happens. I'm guessing it's probably closer to low 30s, maybe 35 tops, unless it's, you know, game 5 of an elimination game, that type of thing. I just struggle to believe that they're going to, you know, increase his workload that substantially in such a short run-up, but we'll see there. I think that Clippers game, Brett's pointed to it a number of times because that was the one game that Embiid, it was the first time that Horford came off the bench, and he and Embiid really did stagger their minutes pretty much exclusively until the fourth quarter. That's when you started to see them play together a little more. I mean, I don't think that Al Horford and Joel Embiid are never going to see the court together. That because, as you said, you know, he is too important of a piece to only play 10 to 13 minutes a night. Now, is he going to play 35 like he was at the start of the season? No, I don't think so. I think it'll probably be closer to 25 or 30. I do think, you know, splitting those guys up, putting Al off the bench, you're ensuring that there should not be a single minute where one of Embiid or Horford is not on the floor at all times. And that's ultimately the value that, you know, for one reason they signed Al Horford. As much as they want to talk about how they thought he would fit as a power forward, whatever, last year in the playoffs when Joel Embiid sat, they got blown off the floor. Didn't matter which guy they were starting at center, whether it was Boban or Greg Monroe or Jonah Bolden, they got annihilated. So having Al Horford there is going to be great. That's going to be his primary role. But yeah, I mean, I'm guessing he probably ends up playing 10 to 15 minutes a night with Joel as well. And it might come down to matchups. I mean, you know, if you're going against a Boston team that doesn't have a ton of really strong big men, you're probably not going to play them as much together because you're going to need to downsize and match up well against Boston's wings. If you're going against an Indiana team, we'll see on Saturday. We'll see with Sabonis. He has a plantar fasciitis, and I'm not 100% sure if he's going to be active for that matchup. But if you're going against a too big lineup, you're probably going to need more of the Horford-Embiid combo. So yeah, I think 25-ish minutes, maybe upward of 30 is probably the safe bet for Horford. But I do think 35 is asking a lot out of him. And it could be good for him, too. I mean, he's had knee issues for the past few years, so hopefully this keeps him fresh and looking a little more spry than he did throughout much of the regular season.
Absolutely. Brian, let's flip it to the rest of the NBA. Let's start in the Eastern Conference. I know the Bucks are the quote-unquote favorite in the East, but I'm looking at the rest of the teams, and I'm looking at the style of this bubble environment. The experience of some teams may come into play, and I think most people would agree that the most experienced team isn't the Bucks, it's actually the Raptors. So how dangerous could the Raptors be in these playoffs?
Yeah, I think they can absolutely be a real threat to defend their whole championship. I mean, Kawhi's gone, Danny Green's gone, and they have the same record that they did last year through 64 games, which is unreal. I mean, it's a testament to Nick Nurse, who I think deserves the Coach of the Year this year. It's a testament to their team president, Masai Ujiri, who's done an incredible job finding some diamonds in the rough with undrafted free agents like Fred VanVleet, but then also guys like Terrence Davis, Matt Thomas, Chris Boucher. Like, these are guys most people have never heard of, and they're playing an important role off the bench for the second best team in the East right now. So, I mean, to your point, yeah, I mean, the Bucks enter this thing not only as favorites in the East, but probably favorites to win the whole thing. But I do think there is at least a possibility that there's going to be more variance than we're expecting. I think, I'm watching all these people tweet out their predictions for what's going to happen. I'm seeing a lot of Bucks, a lot of Clippers, a lot of Lakers as NBA champions. And I get it, because that's where we were when the season went on hiatus in mid-March. But, it wouldn't shock me if a team like the Raptors or the Celtics ended up winning this thing. Even the Heat, if their shooters get hot. I mean, we saw Duncan Robinson just go absolutely nuclear in that first scrimmage. And, a couple guys have said, the depth perception here in this environment is just totally different. And shooters can get a lot more hot than they can in a normal game. So Bucks deserve to go in as favorites, but it really, any of the top 4 teams and Philly, I think, all have a legit shot to come out of the East.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Celtics and the Heat, because I was going to go down that road, and we might as well tie the Sixers in there as well. Who do you think the better matchup is for the Sixers in the first round, Boston or Miami?
Yeah, I've been wrestling with that question for a while now. I mean, I think the Sixers have a better shot, slightly better shot against the Heat than they would against the Celtics. I know that results this year would beg to differ, because they played the Celtics well, and other than that first game against the Heat, they have not played the Heat very well. The Heat they love to use that 2-3 zone that can gum up the Sixers at times. It was their big bugaboo early in the year, but Brett has since said that they really worked on that in practice, and they ended up, figuring out ways to get around it. So I'm not too concerned about that. It is more, they have, between guys like Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, even Goran Dragic, they have guys that can just get nuclearly hot and, drill 5 threes, swing a game. Those types of players always worry me in the playoffs, especially, because that's all it takes. You swing one game, and that could be the difference in the series. But that said, I mean, Boston, with all of those wings, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward, Marcus Smart, that's just a lot of length and versatility. Defense is really strong as well, especially for Tatum and Brown and Smart. The Sixers, they brought in some good wing depth this year, especially at the deadline. They get Glenn Robinson. Ben Simmons played all defensive caliber defense this year, so you can pin him probably on Tatum, but there are only so many guys you can throw at all the Boston players, so you would need a big Joel Embiid series to move past that. But then, looking ahead, if you're the Sixers, do you want to get that 6 seed, get Boston in the first round, but at least you avoid Milwaukee until the conference finals? Or do you want to move up to the 5, get Miami, which I think is a slightly easier series, but then, you're looking at Milwaukee most likely. I mean, no, you're definitely looking at Milwaukee in the second round.
He's Bryan Toporek, co-host of the NBA Podcast. Check out their latest editions of the podcast where they're ranking the top 20 players in the NBA bubble. Also, you guys go through all NBA teams. You power rank all the NBA teams in the Orlando bubble. So you got everything NBA covered there on the NBA Podcast. Bryan Toporek, follow him on Twitter at @BToporek on Twitter. Bryan, always appreciate the time and the great insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Josh. Anytime. Happy that the NBA is back.